At 2:30 p.m. local time, over the choppy waves of the South China Sea, something seemingly routine was unfolding, but it would soon spiral into a 72-minute lesson Beijing never wanted to give away. An American MH-60R Seahawk helicopter, the Navy's versatile workhorse, was hovering steadily, engaged in its quiet but crucial task, hunting submarines. But for China, this was no ordinary flight. This was a trespass, an intrusion, a challenge. And in response, Beijing scrambled one of its most prized attack helicopters, the Z-10. The pilot who climbed into that cockpit that afternoon carried with him an order that sounded simple on paper: scare off the Americans. What he didn't realize was that this mission would become one of the most humiliating encounters in modern aviation history, one where the People's Liberation Army handed the US Navy a treasure trove of intelligence, completely by accident. For the next 72 minutes, the skies over the South China Sea would transform into a silent battlefield of nerves, technology, and electronic warfare. And the world would learn a hard truth. In the age of modern combat, sometimes the deadliest mistake isn't pulling the trigger, it's simply showing up. The MH-60R Seahawk, nicknamed the Romeo, isn't just a helicopter. It's a flying Swiss Army knife. Anti-submarine warfare, surface surveillance, electronic intelligence, rescue operations. The list goes on. On this particular afternoon, its mission was submarine tracking. Below the surface, a Chinese Type 039 diesel-electric submarine was desperately trying to recharge its batteries after 48 long hours underwater. Now, diesel submarines are like sprinters holding their breath. They can run quiet and deep for a time, but eventually they have to surface, to snorkel, to recharge, to breathe. And when they do, every satellite, sonar, and helicopter in the region is waiting, watching, listening. The Romeo's crew of three, two pilots and one sensor operator, were professionals, calm, focused. They weren't sightseeing. They were working, their sensors tuned, their sonar dipping in and out of the waves like a stethoscope pressed against the ocean's chest. And that submarine below them? It was their patient. It was their target. Then came the interruption. From the east, a Z-10 attack helicopter roared into view, scrambled from Xiamen just 28 minutes earlier. Over the radio, a message crackled in Mandarin accented English. "Foreign military aircraft, you are approaching Chinese territorial waters. Alter your course immediately." The words carried weight, but the geography didn't match the threat. The Romeo wasn't near Chinese waters. It was flying in international airspace, 50 nautical miles from any legitimate Chinese claim. The American crew knew this. They didn't even flinch. They had every right to be there. And more importantly, they knew something Beijing didn't. The Z-10 wasn't intimidating them. It was handing them data. The mistake begins. The Z-10 cut aggressively across the Romeo's nose at just 500 meters. To the untrained eye, it looked bold, even threatening. But to US Navy aviators, it looked like theater. The American crew wasn't rattled. Instead, they watched, calm as ever, because their helicopter's electronic support measures, the ALQ-210 pods mounted on its fuselage, were already busy. Think of these pods as digital vacuum cleaners. They were sucking up everything the Z-10 was emitting: radar frequencies, communication protocols, even the subtle engine harmonics that made this specific helicopter unique. Every move the Chinese pilot made, every system he switched on, every attempt to intimidate, it was all being cataloged forever. False show of force. Trying to assert dominance, the Z-10 pilot fired off two flares. Bright streaks of fire tore across the sky. But these weren't weapons. They were flares, defensive countermeasures launched into empty air. To the Americans, it was laughable. A chihuahua barking at a pit bull. The Romeo didn't move an inch. Instead, its dipping sonar continued probing the water below, still fixed on the submarine. That act alone sent a crystal-clear message. We see your submarine. Your helicopter changes nothing. The submarine, realizing the game wasn't working, panicked. It crash-dived, the sudden movement creating a noisy eruption underwater. Cavitation, hull stress pops, turbulence, Sounds so loud they rang across the entire carrier strike group's sonar network. And in submarine warfare, noise equals death. In that moment, thanks to the Z-10's interference, China's own submarine had practically signed its own death warrant, if this had been a real war. But things were only just beginning. At 2:48 p.m., after 18 minutes of these fruitless intimidation tactics, the Chinese pilot thought he finally had the upper hand. His fire control radar achieved a lock on the Romeo. In his cockpit, a warbling tone rang in his ears, the satisfying sound of simulated weapons lock. For a brief moment, he believed he had the Americans where he wanted them. That confidence lasted all of 3 seconds, because in electronic warfare, locking on is one thing, holding that lock is another. Within moments, a nearby EA-18G Growler, one of America's most advanced electronic warfare aircraft, began blasting the Z-10 with electromagnetic energy using its ALQ-99 jamming pods. Suddenly, the Chinese pilot's radar didn't just lose the lock, it hallucinated. On his scope, the single American helicopter split into a dozen ghost images. Some appeared to fly backward. Others seemed to teleport across the screen. One even appeared inside his own cockpit. It was chaos, and it was deliberate. This is what happens when 1990s Russian hand-me-down radar systems meet modern US electronic warfare. As if that wasn't enough, the Chinese pilot's threat display lit up again. Only this time, it wasn't the Seahawk. It was the entire US carrier strike group. Spy radars from Aegis-equipped destroyers painted his helicopter. FA-18. Super Hornets began launching from the deck, not to fire, but simply to remind him that Romeo wasn't alone. Behind it stood the full weight of the Pacific Fleet. It was like being noticed by the Eye of Sauron. Once it sees you, there's no hiding. The Z-10 pilot tried everything, switching frequencies, boosting radar power, even turning his system off and on again. Nothing worked. The American jamming moved faster than he could keep up with. Frequency agile, spectrum dominant, always 10 steps ahead. Meanwhile, inside the Romeo, the crew remained calm. So calm, it said they were probably discussing lunch plans while Beijing's prized attack helicopter embarrassed itself. And the real sting? Every second that passed, the US was collecting more intelligence than Beijing could ever imagine. By now, the Chinese pilot was rattled. His radar picture looked like a scrambled television screen from the 1980s. Static, ghost images, hallucinations. But retreat wasn't an option. Turning back meant punishment, maybe even career suicide. So he pushed forward. He tried aggressive maneuvering, sharp banking turns, pitching the Z-10 up and down in quick bursts. It was a desperate attempt to force the Romeo into a defensive position, to make the Americans flinch. But here's the problem. Physics doesn't care about pride. The Z-10's airframe wasn't designed for the kind of sustained, high-G maneuvers this pilot was forcing it into. Each hard bank bled away speed. Each climb stressed the airframe closer to its limits. The helicopter was groaning under its own weight, its hydraulics straining, its rotor blades flexing dangerously. Meanwhile, the Romeo, built on the rugged, combat-proven Black Hawk platform, stayed steady, smooth, controlled. It had more power, more stability, and far more endurance. It was like watching a street racer redline an old sedan against a finely tuned sports car. The harder the Z-10 pushed, the worse it performed. But here's where things went from bad to catastrophic for Beijing. Every desperate maneuver, every radar ping, every attempt to lock weapons, it was all being recorded. The Romeo's electronic warfare suite was logging every frequency hop, every pulse pattern. The infrared sensors were capturing every hotspot on the Z-10, the glowing exhaust nozzles, the overheating transmission housing, the weak points in its design. In essence, the Chinese pilot was writing the US military a playbook on how to defeat his own helicopter. Future American missiles would be programmed with this data. Future pilots would train against these exact tactics. The Z-10 wasn't just failing to intimidate, it was betraying itself. And the Americans? They didn't have to fire a shot. Meanwhile, the real mission was still underway. Beneath the waves, that Chinese Type 039 submarine was struggling. It had crash-dived earlier, trying to escape detection, but that only made things worse. The emergency maneuver created turbulence and cavitation that made it sound like a drum in the ocean. The US sonar operators didn't just hear it, they practically felt it. And with every desperate turn to evade tracking, the submarine only made itself louder. More noise, more data, more vulnerability. The Romeo's dipping sonar stayed locked on, unshaken by the helicopter buzzing above. The message was clear. Your submarine cannot hide. Your helicopter cannot save it. If this had been war, the Type 039 would have been dead in the water within minutes. At this point, the Z-10 pilot, frustrated and humiliated, decided to get closer. He closed the distance to just 500 meters, close enough to see the American door gunner manning the GAU-21, a .50 caliber machine gun. The gun wasn't pointed at him. It didn't need to be. Its presence alone was a reminder that if things got ugly, the Z-10's armor would last about as long as paper against armor-piercing incendiary rounds. Still, the Chinese pilot pressed forward with thumping maneuvers, aggressive lunges left and right, hoping to bait the Romeo into reacting. But the Americans didn't take the bait. Instead, they let their sensors do the talking. The AAR-47 missile warning system tracked every aspect of the Z-10's movements: maximum turn rate, climb performance, rotor stress. All of it was logged and transmitted. The FLIR cameras recorded every thermal signature: exhaust ports glowing at 450 degrees Celsius, transmission housing at 180 degrees Celsius, hydraulic actuators overheating. These weren't just numbers. They were targeting instructions. Every second the Z-10 remained in the air, it was teaching the US exactly how to destroy it. If the Chinese pilot thought his weapons could turn the tide, reality had another lesson in store. The Z-10 carries a 23mm cannon, effective against ground targets at about 2,500 meters, but nearly useless against a maneuvering helicopter at close range. By contrast, the Romeo's GAU-21 could reach out to nearly 2,000 meters with precision, using armor-piercing incendiary rounds designed to tear through steel and ignite whatever was behind it. Against the Z-10's relatively thin armor, it would be devastating. In short, if this showdown had turned kinetic, the Z-10 would have been shredded long before it had a chance to land a meaningful hit. Inside the Z-10 cockpit, the situation was deteriorating fast. Warning lights flashed across the panel like a Christmas tree. Hydraulic pressure was dropping. Transmission temperatures were climbing into the red. Control inputs were becoming sluggish. The helicopter wasn't just fighting the Americans anymore. It was fighting itself. Still, the pilot pushed harder, silencing alarms and trying one last time to achieve radar lock. He tried 14 times in total. Each failure wasn't just a frustration, it was a gift to the Americans, who logged every failed attempt, every pulse pattern, every desperate frequency shift. It was like watching someone try to guess a password by typing in wrong answers, while the other side wrote down every attempt. When the pilot finally switched to his laser designator, hoping for a breakthrough, the Romeo's sensors immediately identified the system model and software version. With that information, US engineers could design jammers not just for this one helicopter, but for every Chinese vehicle using the same hardware. In less than an hour, one helicopter had compromised an entire generation of Chinese weapon systems. By now, the Z-10 was running at 105% maximum continuous power. Its engines were overheating, producing an infrared bloom 40% brighter than normal. To American sensors, it was like a lighthouse in the night. Future missiles could be programmed to home in on that exact signature. Every radio call between the pilot and ground control was intercepted. The frequency hopping pattern was predictable, exposing how China's encrypted communications could be jammed across the entire theater. The more the ZhZ-10 fought, the more it revealed. The helicopter wasn't defending its submarine or asserting sovereignty. It was peeling itself open for analysis. And the Romeo's crew, calm, professional, unshaken. After nearly an hour of this lopsided encounter, they transmitted with the kind of cold confidence only superiority allows. Chinese military aircraft. This is United States Navy aircraft operating in international airspace in accordance with international law. We will maintain course and altitude below. The Type 039 submarine was still struggling. It had tried diving deep, then surfacing, then turning erratically. None of it worked. The Romeo's sonar held on relentlessly. Every evasive maneuver created more noise, more turbulence, more cavitation. In submarine warfare, silence is survival. And this sub was screaming. If live weapons had been in play, it would have been targeted and destroyed multiple times over. The helicopter buzzing above hadn't protected it. It had doomed it. By now, the Z-10 pilot was breathing hard, sweat dripping down his face inside the cockpit. Each move he made only highlighted his own helicopter's limitations. Sharp turns, rapid climbs, evasive rolls. Every maneuver was tracked, logged, and analyzed. Meanwhile, the Romeo stayed composed, seemingly gliding through the chaos above. Its electronic warfare systems worked silently, methodically, gathering data from every flinch, every failed radar lock, every frantic pulse emitted by the Z-10. The irony? The Chinese pilot believed he was teaching fear. In reality, he was delivering an open-source intelligence package on himself, free of charge. From a cinematic perspective, the Romeo was a masterpiece of precision. The ALQ-210 pods scanned in real time, capturing a symphony of electronic signatures. Radar frequencies, communication channels, engine harmonics, rotor blade vibrations. Every frequency hop, every radar pulse, every failed targeting attempt. It all painted a precise picture for U.S. analysts. And while this was happening, the U.S. crew remained focused on the larger mission, the Type 039 submarine below. The Growler's ALQ-99 pods continued their symphony of chaos. Electromagnetic interference flooded the Z-10 sensors. To the Chinese pilot, it was disorienting. To the Americans, it was intelligence gathering in its purest form. Every 3-second radar lock attempt, logged. Every frequency jump, recorded. Every flare, analyzed for thermal signature and timing. It was a ballet of destruction without a single shot fired. A silent battlefield in the sky. And as the Z-10 struggled, the Romeo remained steady, letting physics and superior design do the talking. Meanwhile, the Type 039 submarine attempted a desperate maneuver. Emergency ballast adjustments, evasive turns, and rapid dives were made to throw off the sonar above. But the Romeo's dipping sonar, combined with data from the carrier strike group, tracked every movement. Cavitation noises rang across the sonar net like gunshots in a canyon. Every panicked move by the submarine only made it easier to track. In submarine warfare, noise is vulnerability. And by this point, the sub had become an open book for the Americans. The Z-10 above, meant to defend it, had effectively accelerated its own submarine's exposure. By hour 1, the Z-10 pilot's confidence had evaporated. His earlier bravado was replaced with tension. His hands ached from fighting the controls, trying to outmaneuver an aircraft designed for stability under extreme conditions. In contrast, the American crew remained composed. Their calmness wasn't arrogance. It was the product of superior design, training, and technology. Every heartbeat, every motion of the Z-10 was logged. Every error became a data point for future mission planning. This wasn't just an encounter. It was a tutorial, delivered without a single American firing a round. The Romeo now began to subtly manipulate the engagement. Small banking maneuvers directed the dipping sonar at the submarine below, forcing it to react. Every evasive maneuver from the sub produced more noise, giving the Americans even more accurate tracking data. Meanwhile, the Z-10, unaware of the true tactical situation, continued to flail. Its aggressive maneuvers stressed the airframe, pushed engines to redline, and revealed every system weakness. The Chinese pilot was essentially writing the US Navy a full operational manual for defeating Z-10 helicopters and Type 039 submarines. Live and in real time, the FLIR, forward-looking infrared system on the Romeo, documented everything. Exhaust ports glowing at 450 degrees Celsius, transmission housings at 180 degrees Celsius, thermal hotspots across the fuselage. This data alone would allow American engineers to program heat-seeking missiles with pinpoint accuracy. If a Z-10 ever threatened a U.S. asset again, the missile systems would know exactly where to strike. Even the rotor harmonics were captured. This meant that just by listening, analysts could identify a Z-10 from miles away. Every failed attempt at radar lock, every flare, every overexerted maneuver, the Z-10 pilot was unknowingly teaching the US Navy how to destroy his aircraft in detail. Meanwhile, communications with ground control weren't secure. Every transmission, every frequency hop, every encryption attempt was intercepted. Analysts now had a roadmap to disrupt Chinese military communications across the entire theater. They could predict patterns, jam frequencies, and gain complete situational awareness without firing a shot. In less than an hour, one Z-10 helicopter had compromised an entire generation of Chinese air and naval tactics. After more than 72 minutes of intense maneuvering, electronic warfare, and intelligence gathering, the Z-10 pilot finally realized that he had no viable options left. The Romeo had remained calm, precise, and untouchable throughout the encounter. The decision to disengage was both tactical and psychological. The pilot had pushed his aircraft and himself to the limit. Hydraulic systems were overheating, transmission temperatures were in the red, and control inputs were sluggish. Retreat was the only way to avoid mechanical failure and potential personal repercussions from ground control. As the Z-10 retreated, the American crew observed every movement. Each mile covered by the Chinese helicopter still provided intelligence. Rotor harmonics, engine performance under load, thermal signatures, and the performance envelope of its electronic warfare countermeasures. The South China Sea returned to relative calm, but the encounter left an invisible battlefield behind. The Romeo, unscathed, had not fired a single round, yet the engagement had effectively neutralized the Z-10 and compromised the Type 039 submarine. Above the water, the carrier strike group monitored the disengagement, noting the pilot's tactical decisions, maneuvering choices, and stress responses. Every detail was logged in real time, creating a record that would serve analysts and planners for years. The pilot had inadvertently handed the Americans a complete operational profile, one that could be used to enhance tactics, design countermeasures, and improve electronic warfare strategies. Back at the U.S. carrier, analysts began the immediate debrief. The intelligence gathered during the encounter was staggering. It included complete radar frequency catalogs and hopping patterns, detailed thermal maps of the Z-10 under high-G maneuvers, communication, encryption, vulnerabilities, and predictable patterns, rotor harmonic frequencies and airframe performance limits, stress responses of both helicopter and pilot under duress. The encounter had effectively provided the U.S. Navy with a roadmap for defeating the Z-10 and similar aircraft in the future, all without a single kinetic strike. From a tactical perspective, the encounter highlighted several key lessons. Information dominance. Superior electronic surveillance and passive intelligence gathering can neutralize aggression without firing a shot. Technology integration. Advanced sensors and electronic warfare suites provide a decisive edge in modern air and sea combat. Pilot psychology. Stress, overexertion, and misjudgment can amplify vulnerabilities, turning aggressive tactics into liabilities. Electronic warfare superiority. Frequency agile, multi-band jamming can create hallucinations on enemy sensors, rendering outdated systems ineffective. Submarine vulnerabilities. Overhead pressure and aerial tracking can compromise stealth operations even without direct engagement. Each of these lessons was now documented for training, analysis, and strategic planning purposes. The encounter had broader strategic implications as well. For the U.S., it demonstrated the effectiveness of combining advanced helicopters with a full carrier, strike group in a layered defense and intelligence gathering operation. For China, the engagement highlighted vulnerabilities in both hardware and operational protocols. Z-10 pilots had been taught a harsh lesson. Outdated systems and overconfidence could be exploited without the adversary ever firing a shot. In the wider context of naval and aerial strategy, this engagement became a case study in how electronic and information superiority can dictate outcomes even against numerically or regionally aggressive forces. While the technological and tactical lessons were profound, the encounter also revealed the importance of human factors. The Z-10 pilot had been well-trained, but the psychological pressures of prolonged engagement, combined with inferior technology, created compounding errors. Fatigue, stress, and the inability to interpret the opponent's capabilities correctly had direct operational consequences. The U.S. crew, by contrast, showcased the importance of composure, teamwork, and decision-making under high-stakes conditions. Their calmness, experience, and trust in superior systems amplified the effectiveness of the engagement without resorting to violence. This encounter serves as a modern military lesson in several ways. Electronic warfare. Controlling the electromagnetic spectrum is now as important as controlling physical territory. Intelligence collection. Real-time surveillance and recording provide actionable insights that can neutralize threats preemptively. Tactical patience. Allowing an adversary to self-expose under stress can yield more valuable intelligence than immediate engagement. Airframe and system limitations. Aggressive maneuvers against a superior platform can lead to mechanical failure or self-compromise. Training and preparedness. Comprehensive training for pilots and crews can maximize the effectiveness of advanced technology even in tense encounters. The engagement over the South China Sea became a real-world illustration of these principles, demonstrating the shift from traditional combat to information-centric warfare. In the end, the Z-10 pilot's attempt at intimidation became an unintended tutorial for the Americans. One helicopter, flying aggressively, had exposed its own weaknesses, compromised a submarine, and delivered intelligence that would shape future operations. All this occurred without the firing of a single missile or bullet. For the U.S., the encounter reinforced the value of technology, composure, and strategic patience. For the world, it highlighted the evolving nature of modern warfare, where data, observation, and electronic dominance can decisively shape outcomes. The South China Sea had witnessed not a battle of firepower, but a masterclass in intelligence, electronic warfare, and tactical superiority. And as the Z-10 returned to base, exhausted and defeated, the Americans had collected not just intelligence, but a living lesson in why information, control, and technology now define modern combat. In modern naval warfare, sometimes the deadliest weapon is knowledge itself, and today that knowledge was handed freely by a pilot who never knew he was teaching the enemy how to win.